What if the greatest secret of the Christian faith was not in the heavens, but in the blood? For centuries, the image of Jesus was surrounded by holiness, silence, and reverence. But what if, behind that light, there was a story too human to be told from the pulpits? What if Jesus not just loved, but did you really love someone? And more, what if you gave love? Had children been born? Could what we call heresy actually be the missing piece in humanity's spiritual puzzle? Today we're going to delve into the most hidden layers of history and find out if what seemed like just fiction in the Da Vinci Code, it may be much closer to the truth than you think. In 2003, the world was rocked by a book that seemed like just another mystery thriller. But the Da Vinci Code, by Dan Brown, did something that few had the courage to do: poked at the sacred heart of the Christian faith by suggesting that Jesus could have married Mary Magdalene, and that from this love, a secret lineage, protected over the centuries, would have emerged. The author did not just write fiction. He touched an open wound. Official critics were quick to say that everything was invention, literature, exaggeration. But the intensity of the reaction said more than any theological response. Someone had gotten too close to something that many wanted to keep silent. What was at stake was not just an alternative storyline about Jesus. It was the possibility that the Christ of the altars could also have been a man of flesh, feeling, and choice. A man who truly loved, who got involved, and who may have left more than a message. At the time, conservative theologians rushed to discredit the book, accusing it of heresy and historical manipulation. But at the same time, independent scholars began to be heard as never before. Ancient books, apocryphal gospels, forgotten traditions, they resurfaced like pieces of a larger puzzle, and the public, who until then had passively accepted the official version, began to ask themselves, what if there's something they never told us? What if the greatest secret in Christian history is hidden within the very figure we follow? At that moment, what began as fiction became spiritual provocation. For centuries, she was portrayed as a repentant sinner, but perhaps this was the most effective way to hide its true importance. Mary Magdalene appears in forgotten texts, not as a prostitute, but as an intimate, intelligent, and spiritual presence at Jesus' side. In the Gospel of Philip, found among the Nag Hammadi manuscripts, there is a phrase that bothers scholars to this day. The Savior loved Mary more than all the disciples, and he often kissed her on the mouth. For some, this is a metaphor. For others, it is literal. But perhaps what scares the most is not the kiss, but what it represents. Proximity, choice, equality. Maria was more than a follower. He was a confidant, maybe wife, maybe mom. The problem wasn't with her. The problem was what it symbolized: a woman with direct access to the divine, without the need for hierarchies. And in a structure built on control, this was unbearable. In fact, if you've come this far and feel that these reflections also touch you in some way, click the like button. It may seem small, but this is how YouTube understands that this type of content deserves to reach more people. People who are also looking for truth beyond the obvious. From a young age, we learn that Holy Grail, it was the cup used by Jesus at the Last Supper, a sacred object shrouded in mystery and legend. But there is something that few realize. The origin of the word Grail is shrouded in a language game that changes everything. In Old French, the Holy Grail can also be read as sang real, i.e. royal blood. What if this isn't just a linguistic variation? See for a clue left in plain sight that no one should decipher? This reading completely changes the meaning of the legend. The Grail ceases to be a mystical object and becomes a living lineage. Yes, a descendant of Jesus, a blood that was not shed just to redeem, but that also it continued to run quietly for generations. Now imagine the impact of this. An entire theological structure based on the idea of an elevated, untouchable Jesus above the flesh, suddenly faced with the possibility that he loved, married, had children, and that these children they survived. hidden, protected in silence. The legend of the Grail in this context is not about a golden chalice, but about the womb that carried this blood. On Mary Magdalene, not as a supporting character, but as the Grail itself. And if Christendom's greatest secret isn't a relic, but a woman, and a lineage born of the union between divinity and humanity, something deeply spiritual and deeply human. There is something that runs behind the scenes of European history like an elegant shadow, the idea that some families carry a different blood, sacred, silent, and highly protected. As medieval legends, unofficial manuscripts, and even messages encoded in stained glass windows and tombs speak of this, from a lineage that never became extinct because it was never revealed. A Order of Zion, a Knights Templar, a early Freemasonry. Everyone appears at some point as guardians of a secret much greater than gold or power. They guarded people. According to some theories, these secret societies did not arise simply due to political influence or the desire for spiritual dominance. They emerged to protect a living heritage, a lineage that couldn't fall into the wrong hands, or worse, be officially recognized, but protected from what, or rather, whose, of a system that, from the beginning, was built to keep Jesus as an unattainable symbol, a divine being without human desires, without weaknesses, without material legacy, an untouchable icon. Because if he had left children, authority would no longer be limited to books, altars, or dogmas, would be in the flesh, in the blood, in the people, and that would be too dangerous. A descendant of Jesus would put everything at risk: hierarchies, sacraments, the spiritual monopoly of an institution that has always profited from the distance between God and man. Because a Christ with heirs. He is a Christ who loved like us, cried like us, lived like us. A Christ who he walked among us, and maybe he still does. The canonical Gospels, those officially approved by the Church, show us Jesus as an adult, preaching, healing, challenging authorities. But there is a blank where, intuitively, we expected to find something. Your youth, your routine, your emotional bonds. Simply, they are not there. It's like opening a book of memories and finding pages torn out, not by accident, but by decision. In a society where men Jesus' age commonly married, formed families, and actively participated in community life, the silence about his personal life sounds more like a choice than an omission. Why ignore precisely the years that shape character? Affections? Bonds? Why leave out everything that would make you more human? Did those years not exist? Or will it they were lived? But couldn't they be told? It's like a carefully cropped family photo, where what's missing says more than what's left. And now, tell me in the comments, have you ever looked through an old album where someone was erased from history? That relative that no one talks about, that story that everyone talks about. Do you think the Gospels did the same with part of Jesus' life? Comment below sincerely if you believe if Jesus really had children. Your vision can open a new window of understanding. For many people here on the channel, the year was 1945. While the world was still recovering from the scars of war, something silent, almost invisible, was happening in the Egyptian desert. Peasants dug the dry land near the Nag Hammadi when they found ancient ceramic pots. When opening them, they expected to find grains or remains of offerings. But what was there was much more valuable. Manuscripts, hidden texts, gospels that time did not destroy, but that history tried to bury. There were the so-called Gnostic Gospels, spiritual writings that do not speak of rules, sin, and punishment, but yes, self-knowledge, internal revelation, and spiritual equality. These texts presented a very different view of Jesus. He was not just a savior to be worshipped, but a master to be understood. He didn't impose. He provocative. It didn't say, believe or you will be condemned. It said, "Know yourself and you will discover what is divine about you." And in this context, Mary Magdalene assumes a central role. She appears as spokesman of wisdom, someone who understood the teachings in a profound way, to the point of causing jealousy and resistance among the other disciples. In some passages, Peter questions why Jesus spoke to her so much. And Jesus responds, "She understood with her heart." These Gospels were not rejected because they were false. They were rejected by, say, too much. They did not deny Jesus. They just revealed a more intimate, more symbolic, more human, and perhaps more liberating side. And once again, the figure of Mary, silenced by official history, resurfaced as key piece of an enigma much deeper than a simple theological scandal. So far, we have covered theories, forgotten manuscripts, forbidden names, and misunderstood symbols. But perhaps the true impact of these revelations lies not in the scandal, but in the simplicity. What if none of this is a threat to faith, but rather an invitation to deepen it? What if Jesus had a wife, children, an emotional human life, and yet he continued to be divine? Would it really be so absurd to believe that love does not contradict holiness, but completes it? Perhaps, for centuries, we have been taught to see the spiritual as something that separates us from what is human, the desires, the bonds, the flesh, the doubt. But what if it's just the opposite? What if the divine chose to manifest itself precisely through what is earthly, fragile, and sensitive, not to prove to us that he is superior, but to remind us that it is affordable? Perhaps the greatest spiritual revolution is not in ascending to the heavens, but in recognizing the heaven that exists in human experience lived with consciousness. Accept the idea of a Jesus with heirs, with a family history, with a companion, does not diminish its greatness. Multiplies your proximity, because a Jesus who loved, who cried, who had bonds. It is a Jesus who understands us completely, and it is this type of faith, real, incarnate, imperfect, that can transform much more than doctrines. Many theories maintain that Jesus' lineage survived, in secret, protected over the centuries by silent orders, discrete families, names erased from the history books. Some believe that this heritage was passed down from generation to generation like a hidden seed, far from the eyes of power, but alive. But perhaps the most powerful question is not where these descendants are, but yes, what if this lineage is not just biological? What if it's spiritual? What if the true legacy of Jesus wasn't in the blood that runs through someone's veins, but in the awakening that beats in the hearts of all of us? Because what he left was not just a message, it was a calling. A call to access the divine not in unreachable temples, but within ourselves. To remember that the sacred is not tied to surnames or the approval of institutions. He lives in every gesture of compassion, in every conscious choice, in every truth, lived with courage. If so, then perhaps Jesus' lineage need not be found. She needs to be recognized, and the biggest secret, it is not buried in tombs or hidden in secret societies. It is waiting to be activated right here, right now, in you. So if this content spoke to you, subscribe to the channel here. Let's continue together on this journey of rediscovery, questioning, and depth. Here, each video is more than information. It's an invitation to look beyond the veil. And if you stayed until the end, write the word awaken. This way, I will know who is already vibrating at this frequency. And you can be sure your presence here makes all the difference. See you in the next mystery.